What's good, Internet? I am your host, Igor Bonifacic, and you're listening to the Mobile Syrup Podcast, otherwise known as the SyrupCast. We are on episode 105. Today is, let me just check, January 25th? 26th. In case you didn't know, the doomsday clock has moved 30 seconds closer to the end of the world, thanks to, in part, of course, one Donald Trump, and also... They didn't state this as a fact, but Nickelback releasing their 9th studio album. You know how the saying goes, when it rains, it pours. But thankfully, the rain isn't radioactive yet.
It came out today?
They've announced that they're going to release.
Oh, sweet.
That is the voice of my frequent guest, well, always guest, my tag team wrestling duo, our partner, I should say, Shawshank McGillicuddy. How are you?
We should get that happening. Let's make our own WWE wrestling team.
I'm on it. Let's do it. Mobile Syrup business editor, Jessica Vomiero.
Hi, Igor. How's it going?
Not too bad. Unless I forget, because he's often forgotten.
Hurts my feelings.
Zach Gilbert. How are you, sir?
Great. I'm going to send Avril Lavigne a tweet to listen to this podcast because you're making fun of Nickelback.
Are you going to tell her to look at this photograph?
Yeah, exactly.
Whoa.
Look at this photo. Yeah.
We have a jam-packed episode for you today. So we're just going to jump into the tunes and then get right back into it. So welcome back. In case you've been living under a rock, everything happened for Samsung this week. Starting with, I think, what is the most important thing was there's vice chairman who is the de facto CEO or will become the de facto leader of Samsung, Lee Jae-young. He was accused of bribery, embezzlement, and other fun things that men in suits want to do.
But they didn't actually arrest him.
But they didn't arrest him. But he's not out of the woods yet. And then there's a lot to say about that, and it's like a super convoluted thing that's happening in South Korea, which we won't talk about because it is that convoluted. Instead, we'll talk about the earnings report. Jessica, she wrote about the earnings report. So Jess, do you want to lay it on us?
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody was kind of expecting Samsung to have a less than stellar fourth quarter due to the Note 7 disaster that took place in the last half of the year. But lo and behold, they actually had their third most profitable quarter in company history. I don't know how these huge, large conglomerates do it, but they were able to pull out a stellar earnings report with the sale of their memory chips. And it's interesting because they actually lost $5 billion on the whole Note 7 debacle, all in all, but they were still able to pull out a pretty impressive final revenue score.
Is some of that just because the impact of the Note 7 hasn't been felt yet financially for Samsung?
It's really possible. I mean, we did see a final press release on the Note 7 and what actually went wrong with it, and they've actually only returned 95% of the product. So it's very likely that they haven't recorded the impact yet, that it hasn't actually been felt in the fiscal year just yet. But it definitely wasn't what we expected to see at the end of 2016 for Samsung.
So I guess we should say on Sunday, Samsung announced the results of its investigation into the Note 7's flame up. Patrick, you covered that. What was the gist of that?
Yeah, it was actually kind of fascinating to see a company the size of Samsung go into the technical intricacies of why everything went wrong. But basically, there were two batteries. The first one that the phone came out with, and that one, the problem was the battery was too small. Too big for the phone's casing, and the right corner of the battery. There's this super technical explanation, but basically too small for the casing, caused some, I guess you would call abnormalities, is what Samsung kept saying, and that caused the battery to overheat and explode. And then the second battery, which came from a third-party supplier, that still doesn't want to talk about the issue, which is amusing. That one came. It was. Partially, it seems to be Samsung's fault and partially the manufacturer's fault. In order to meet the demand for all the replacement Note 7 devices, that manufacturer ramped up production. And in that process, they introduced a manufacturing or design flaw that had to do with soldering, where the current was being carried over two different points of the battery, causing it to overheat. So two different causes, but the same end result of exploding phones.
Zach, what was your kind of take on this whole Mia Coppola?
Well, like how they kind of came out and did it. We talked about it in the office before, and it's different, right? So how they showed everything, how they talked about the issues and how they came to be, a huge press event, right? And just nobody's done this before, but nobody's had this issue before to this degree. But the big interesting thing will be how kind of the bigger scope of things and how their brand is affected.
So speaking of brand, as just noted, it doesn't seem like there's been an effect on their bottom line, at least not yet. What do you kind of attribute to Samsung's staying power, at least for the brand? Like we've seen reports where it said, Apple wasn't able to profit off of Samsung's misfortunes in Q4 2016 because it just seemed people were like, well, I guess I would just wait for the S8.
Yeah. Well, there's some people, and we've seen this through tweets and comments on Facebook and within the site and everything, that you kind of have a lot of people saying, you know what, things happen. My phone didn't explode, and they took the product back, and it was pretty easy, and everything's okay. And then there's other people that are like, well, no, I'm never going to go with Samsung again. They ended up buying a different Android. Small fraction of them went to iPhone. But it's, in terms of the Q4 stuff, you can use some interesting accounting principles and stuff to make things look the way you want them to look. And depending on how law is there and write down a product and stuff like that, depreciate it or whatever, right? There's ways you can account for losses, and depends on when they recorded these, as Jess was saying, right? It depends on when you were recording these refunds, right? So they could be recording these sales of these devices, these millions and millions of units or whatever, and then be recording the profit and not being recording the loss yet. So we'll have to see what happens on the next earnings to really account for what's going on.
They're probably
absolutely.
They could be hoping that like the S8 bounces that off.
Yeah, they could
bit.
very well be waiting. They could be pushing off actually introducing the impact of the Note 7 into the report, because they technically haven't returned all the devices yet, to see how the S8 does, and maybe they'll be able to offset it and say, well, it wasn't so bad. Look at these profits from our next flagship. But it's very easy to move things around in an earnings report to account for losses here and there. So we don't really know, for lack of a better word, how things are going to look on the next report that we receive from Samsung.
I think the S8 is still going to sell like crazy.
Oh,
too.
yeah.
Sure, yeah.
Maybe there's some people that they lost, right? Like that's obviously the case. We saw like in the comment section, I'm sure Zach was having fun moderating some of the very angry former Samsung fans. But I think some people liked how Samsung handled the problem, and they're going to stick by them.
So now that we have kind of the clarity of hindsight, and then I mean, there's still apparently 200 Canadians or 200
phones
rogue
at large
Note 7 units in Canada.
A lot of them in remote areas.
Yeah, that's what they're saying. They're having issues actually getting a carrier to go and get them that can handle dangerous goods.
Okay, fair enough. So not rogue then. Just no way to get out.
No, apparently to the comment section, there's a guy that has
He's got
3.
Who knows?
I have 3 Note 7s.
I have charged at 100%.
Who knows if he's serious? So that'd be kind of awesome if he was.
I kind of hope so.
It's kind of like
legendary.
now, right? It's like, whoa.
I'm going to throw my Note 7
He's
at
got
you.
Note 7.
Unplug the Note 7. Put it down.
So now that this is kind of behind us, I guess, what do you guys think will be the lasting impact of this? Like, did Samsung handle this properly? Zach, you're shaking your head.
No.
So
I've talked to a lot of friends who I went to school with. So I went to school for marketing and stuff. So, and in terms of other companies, Tylenol or whatever, who years and years ago had a massive recall on their products, and how that was handled. Samsung's handling this was just abysmal.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Like, when you kind of take it down to brass tacks, the fact that the batteries from Amperex were blowing up is like directly Samsung's fault.
Yeah.
Right? Like, why not take the time to scale up this operation properly, and instead they rushed to try and they're like, oh, we figured it out.
That's the third party, right? The third party battery provider?
Yeah, that's so Samsung SDI and Amperex were the two firms that provided the batteries for the Note 7. Like, it really calls into question Samsung's kind of QA, right?
Well, and really just communicate things, right? So clarity is better than kind of, saying, look over here while we do this and kind of go on upon in the background. But they were never clear with their customers. They were never clear with anyone. Samsung Canada had a different idea with what was going on with Samsung USA and Samsung in other parts of the world. And it was not one unified marketing message that was coming across. So some people didn't know where to take their phone, didn't know what to do. Was it really a recall? Was it not a recall? And then eventually...
Well, for them, it was not really... So that's correct that it was not the best way to approach it, but they did that on purpose. Like, each region handled the recall in a different way, because in Samsung's mind, they were handling it in a way that made sense for that geographical region. Like, they rolled out
cultural, right?
Like cultural and whatever differences. They rolled out like that software update in South Korea that limited the battery, and they knew they couldn't do that in the US or Canada because that's
un-American,
right? Like, the response to that would be totally different, I guess, in their eyes. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But they did it bad, but I kind of understand why they did those differences.
Yeah, the intent
Jess,
was there.
Yeah, so Jess, when we first started talking about this way back when, you were of the opinion, and this was around the time of the first recall, so before all of this subsequent stuff came out, that Samsung had done it properly. What's your take now?
I think that when all is said and done, Samsung is a corporation with so many moving parts, with that is in so many markets. It's not like Rogers doing a recall in Canada, right? We have to think about them exercising this message across essentially the entire world. So I do think that they did their best to be transparent when, for the majority of when this first started happening, they really didn't know what was going on themselves. Like, they couldn't communicate, we have the answer, because they didn't have the answer to the battery problem. And while I understand that them rushing to issue replacement devices as fast as they did caused the second problem, and I understand why they did it. They wanted to get new devices into people's hands as soon as possible to kind of say, okay, all done, don't worry about it anymore, right? I think that with something like this that just keeps unfolding and you get a new piece of the story every single day, you have to react to it as it comes, and that's what the company did.
But it's clear that they're concerned about sales versus image.
I think they were concerned about...
And safety, yeah, for sure, right?
Yeah.
But you can't have... So to a degree, you can have localized marketing or communication methods for each area, because you have to. Like, we got language barriers, you've got just overall...
different regulations.
Exactly, right? But with the world we live in, and with the internet, and with communication being so quick and so easy, you can't have a different way of going about what you're doing in different areas. In my mind, they should have said, okay, stop production, stop selling devices, but there was people still being able to buy devices after they had stopped selling them. They should have set up, local areas to ship the devices back to Samsung directly, skip the carrier, skip all that nonsense, because people were going to the carriers at the beginning, and the carriers are like, I don't know what to do. Like, we haven't gotten formal information.
Right, and that was a big issue here in Canada.
Huge, right?
Yeah.
Very confusing.
So they should have set these up. They should have gone directly back to Samsung, and then Samsung should have worked it out with the carriers. All the devices are tracked through IMEI, right? It's not an issue. They should have gone through that process and handled it for the customer, versus saying, hey, you customer that you just spent, maybe you spent $400, $600 on the device. The device is actually $900, $1,000 or whatever, right? You just spent $1,000 on our device. Now you go do a roundabout and figure out how to get this device back to us. It should have been, here you go, call us. We're going to get a shipping container to you. We're going to get the product away from you and back. And
well, they did do that, sort of, right? They were sending out those...
Only after the second.
I think they really consolidated their message the second time around, but the first time I really don't think they knew what to tell people. They didn't know whether or not people were going to have to return all of their devices, whether or not they were going to be able to issue an update that fixed the problem.
So the fascinating thing to me is that, what was the worst case... Well, I mean, we now know what the worst case scenario was, which is these phones continue to explode, right, and overheat. Yep. But I think at that moment, like, what would you say was the worst case scenario? Like, what? Like, we have to push back the re-release of the Note 5-6 months? It's still, if you had released it like January 1st, let's say, it's still here like several months ahead of the S8. It still kind of appeals to a different category of buyer, right? Like that is I think obviously in hindsight a much preferable outcome than the one that Samsung eventually got.
I think with the first recall too, I think they maybe underestimated the impact of it and how many devices were actually affected.
I think that's the key issue here.
But I mean, there's as you guys know, I like to use my platitudes. Measure twice, cut once, right? Like, why didn't they measure twice?
The thing is too is
money.
Very good point.
Money.
Right?
Yeah.
But no company is ready for
this
type of thing.
Yeah.
There are, courses. There are, people who go to organizations and train them on emergency
crisis management.
Exactly, right? Because you can see over the progression of this recall how things got better and better in terms of how they were managing everything. That's when they started shipping the boxes, right?
Yeah, with the second one.
And then it ended with this massive press conference.
Yeah, I thought the press conference was great, and they were super transparent about it. They gave very interesting statistics regarding like the actual research process. They probably broke it down way more than they needed to, but I think some of that was like a response to all the controversy surrounding it. So they had 700 engineers check 200,000 devices and 30,000 batteries in order to determine exactly what happened. But like Igor was saying, that's what they should have been doing before the first time, right? Like it shouldn't have gotten to this point.
Except things were leaking where emails were leaking where Samsung apparently had no idea what was the problem. Nobody could reproduce the problem.
So our wonderful sound engineer Robin just pointed out to me that they were, one thing to keep in mind is that they were trying to beat the release of the iPhone 7, right?
Yeah.
And that is in some reports have stated that is what is the kind of origin point of all the problems with the Note 7, is that Samsung thought the iPhone was going to be pretty lackluster this year. I think that turned out to be the case, and they thought they could beat Apple significantly with the Note 7. In the end, it blew up in their face.
It's quite a shame, though.
That just reaffirms what I was saying, where they're concerned about their profits versus their customer experience.
But I think if this happened to Apple, a similar thing would happen. Like it would go down in a very similar way. I don't even think Apple would be ready for this level of recall or have like a response this quickly.
I think this is definitely something that is now a case study, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
Sure.
And I think that Apple will benefit in the future if they ever have to deal with something like this.
One key thing Apple has is the Apple Store.
That's true. Yeah.
That's
So
true.
that one thing would have, provided just so much benefit to them as a company.
What about the two Samsung stores in Canada
Oh, yeah,
or whatever?
You
it
can't
is?
even
They
buy
didn't even know
anything
what was going on.
You can. The one at Sherwood Gardens, it's just like an Apple store, but there's only like two of them, right? So it doesn't have the same impact.
Readers were messaging me and saying, I tried to go back to, what do I do? How do I get this? I went to the store and they had no idea what was going on. Your own store doesn't know what the hell's going on. Like, come on.
I think it's also important to put in perspective that Samsung, its revenue accounts for is equivalent to, at one point was, and currently it's 18% of South Korea's GDP. At one point it was 20%. Like, this is a huge company with like its hands in everything, like
tons of
shipbuilding,
moving parts.
fashion, cars,
Exploding washing machines.
Temperamental TVs, yeah,
displays.
So moving into the launch of the S8, how do you guys feel this phone is going to do from what you've heard of it? Because we just had a really interesting report from The Guardian that kind of detailed it in really specific terms.
I think it's going to do well, mainly because for Android users, they don't have much else. Like, what do they have? The G6 that's coming out? And the LG,
which we'll get to.
LG is banking on that phone.
They've got.
But you know what? I disagree with that. I think 2016 we saw the best crop of Android phones ever, right? Like you had the OnePlus 3T, best phones ever.
Pixel's still really good.
Pixel
can't
XL,
get it, but
yeah, I think what you're saying is right, but in a different context. Like, to so many people, Samsung is Android. All these other companies don't exist in their mind. And I know that the Note 7 thing blew up pun intended, and it was everywhere on mainstream news and stuff like that. But I still see this phone selling very well. Maybe not as well as it would have if this didn't happen, but it's still gonna ship like a ton of units.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that can be mainly, at least partially attributed to the fact that you can go to any carrier anywhere and they will have a Samsung device somewhere. You may not be able to get some of the lesser known Android brands at Kudo or Fido,
Yes.
and that you can just get iPhones and Samsung devices everywhere for the most part.
Imagine you could get the 3T at a carrier.
Yeah, you can't get
That's
I know
the
you
issue,
love the
right?
OnePlus, but you just can't
You
go to a
can't it's
Rogers
true.
pop-up shop and pick
Yeah.
one up.
But to be fair, I don't think I'd like spending time at a Rogers pop-up shop.
It's terrible.
neither
Don't
would I.
go.
I think for North America, they'll see a decrease.
Mm-hmm.
For
Why specifically North America?
just because North Americans don't have the same attachment to the brand
Okay.
as
I guess
say in the home country. Was it Korea? Sorry,
South Korea.
South Korea.
North Korea.
Yes.
Dear
Yeah,
God.
no,
Zach.
yeah.
Gosh.
Kim Jong-un.
You can direct
No.
all your hate mail to Zach.
I know it's not North Korea. That's where that movie was filmed, and they told us that they can't play it in theaters and stuff.
It wasn't
it's
actually
this-
filmed there. Though.
No,
No, it
Frank,
wasn't.
I know, but
Yeah.
'cause that'd be impressive if they managed to do that.
Oh, that's funny.
But yeah, I think because the North America populace doesn't have the same brand connection as South Korea, or
I mean, that's such a. I mean, we don't live in South Korea, right? Like, I haven't interviewed a bunch of South Koreans on their opinions
No,
on this, right?
but
So,
flip it around and go, for iPhone for Americans, it's Apple, it's America.
but it's
Well,
same,
it's Americans, but-
same in China, right? They love their iPhones, right? Like it's.
And Xiaomi.
I don't know if
yeah,
that
it's gonna become
regional
number 4,
brand
right?
commitment necessarily
Or
applies
they
as
wouldn't
much
be
as
number
it
1.
did before the age of the. Sorry, I totally interrupted all of you. But
No, please do.
that
yeah.
I don't know if that regional brand commitment necessarily applies as much as it used to now that marketing is so global and brands are so global because of how widespread and penetrative the internet has become. Just in general, I don't know if that necessarily
You
applies
don't have the
anymore.
homegrown sentiment, right? That's the thing, right? So people love the brand. Android and
I don't
other
know.
devices
I'd
still.
be
I don't know
willing
if-
to bet
I don't
that a
know
lot
if
of
people
Americans
look at Samsung that way there.
don't
Hey,
know that
we-
Samsung is
if
from
we have
South
any
Korea.
listeners or watchers, that was a movie too. I can't remember.
The
Watchers,
watching the
players.
Watchers
Anyways.
or something.
Watches, yeah.
In
South Korea.
South Korea, let us know. Like, what do you think about this? And
From what I've read, like, Samsung is such a part of Korean, kind of the fabric of Korea.
That's what I'm
because
saying.
it's like everywhere.
yeah,
Right? Like I said, 20%, almost 20% of national GDP, right? Like,
it's Canadians to BlackBerry. Like, look at our
but
comments.
no, that's not even like, it's on a scale that is completely different to BlackBerry.
No, I mean
right?
in terms of like the patriotism.
But it, like, yeah, sure. Like, this is, imagine if like, every other car was a BlackBerry.
yeah.
Some of the buildings were built by BlackBerry. Like,
But that's what I mean. That's why I think
Yeah.
that North America doesn't have that connection to the brand, so they may not be as willing to forgive them as
Maybe.
yeah,
South Korea would.
we'll see. In
I
any
guess we
case.
have to see.
Yeah. The other thing that happened, it was relatively like kind of a slow news week in the sense that there wasn't a lot of Canadian news, but what we did hear a lot about was Samsung's in-country competitor, which was LG. They also released their earnings report, and they had their worst quarter in 6 years.
They did.
LG Electronics, that is. Obviously, like Samsung, LG is a multifaceted company.
Yeah.
Makes everything from non-exploding dishwashers to non-exploding smartphones.
Gas.
Also,
They have gas stations, which
They
is
have
kind of
gas.
weird.
Here,
Cool.
really?
No,
I was
not
gonna
here,
say.
not here.
in Korea, obviously. And we got a first look at the G6. So this phone is kind of interesting for a couple of reasons. One, it has this kind of, it wouldn't be LG if it didn't have gimmicks. And the gimmicks in this case is a taller screen than your usual phone. It's like, what's the, do you know the aspect ratio, Pat? It's like something
I have
like,
it open here. I'm trying to find it.
but it's QHD plus is what they're calling it.
18:9 ratio display.
Right. So instead of the standard 16 by 9.
Yeah.
We also found out it won't ship with the new Snapdragon, which is really interesting because it turns out like Samsung just bought first dibs in part because they're the manufacturer.
It's the A35, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, so not modular, which is something else we talked about previously. And this phone, the question I wanted to ask you, Zach, was what's interesting about this phone is they had the choice between waiting for shipments of this processor or just going with an older processor, getting into market. And now they have potentially even more of a head start because previously best case scenario was launch alongside the S8. Now best case scenario is like a month or two maybe ahead of the S8. I guess for everyone, having seen what you've seen of this phone, what do you think? Zach, specifically, is this phone going to do enough to kind of get LG back in the game?
That's a good question. I don't know. Well, to use a term slightly incorrectly, but like first mover advantage, normally it's meant for, when a company goes to a country and they can start building anyways. But before anyone else gets there. But they... technically, if they can get this out before, they'll have first mover advantage over Samsung in the cell phones of 2017.
Yeah.
Now,
for how much that's worth.
Well, to them, their brand weight is not as much as Samsung's is. Like if you go and you go to get a TV, what do you think? A lot of people are thinking Samsung or LG, but typically Samsung.
Those OLED panels, man.
LG has a pretty good reputation.
They do.
too, for
I
TVs.
just picked up a TV by LG the other day or the other week.
WebOS.
Rest in peace, Palm. But the average consumer is not going to give a crap about what processor is in there.
For sure, yeah.
You're just small. Let's say 10% of the market is like us or you guys watching or listening, and cares that it's an 835 and that it has faster cores or better GPU or whatever. But
I want all the pixels, man.
Well, yeah, most customers are going to go in the store. Does it look good?
It looks. So what do you guys? I mean, we saw the first I'll go ahead and say it's the first official. It was quote unquote leaked by the Verge.
I thought it looked really nice. I mean, the G5. When I reviewed it and when I went hands-on with it at MWC last year, it was like, so the modularity stuff was cool just because it was different. I didn't know if it was going to work. It obviously didn't work. All of the mods didn't turn out to be what I think they needed to be.
I think none of them turned out to be what they needed to be.
None of them, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially the camera.
The camera grip, yeah.
You had to charge separately, and it wasn't even powered by the phone.
To touch on the module, it would have been cool if they put a small capacitor or battery in there that the phone would stay running while you swapped out the modular part.
Or they could have just done something like
Motorola
Motorola did that made way more sense
Yeah.
with like a magnetic connector. But that phone, it wasn't just the mods, right? Like it was an ugly looking phone to me. Anyways, it had I don't even know how to describe it. To a certain extent, to me, it didn't look finished. Like it looked like a prototype that maybe was released a little too early. There's something off about the dual camera setup. The dual camera was cool. It worked great, but it gave this phone this look of something that was almost like a prototype.
Right.
And from what I've seen, like I'm looking at the G6 photo right now, it looks pretty sleek. I don't know if the whole aspect ratio gimmick is going to be like actually worthwhile, but it looks nice. It looks like a step above what the G5 was, and I think that that's what they need to do.
Your opinion on it, Jess?
Well, I think that people were not quite ready for the modular strategy that they went for with the G5, and Motorola has released a much cleaner version of that modular option, which I don't know whether or not consumers are diving into stores saying, I want the Moto mods. But I think that going with a different gimmick is probably smart for LG at this point, despite the fact that I think it is still a gimmick. As somebody who prefers smaller phones in general, just because they're much easier for me to hold and put in my pocket, I don't know if I would use this phone. I think that it's another example of a phone that's built for a particular market. I don't necessarily like it that much.
Yeah, I feel like this is a gimmick that's kind of easy to swallow, right? As opposed to like...
At the very least, it looks like a finished phone.
Yeah, you're like, it's a bit taller, whatever.
I've always been a big fan of like when LG is making the Nexus devices. Like they made the 4
The 5.
The 5 and the 5X. I like those phones. The 5X, I think back when I reviewed it, I said it was like my favorite phone of all time. Even in terms of look, despite the fact that it wasn't like a full metallic phone, it had like this rugged, solid looking body that was nice for, at the time, kind of like a little bit above mid-range device.
Yeah.
So I mean, LG has that history of cool design, and to me, the G5 was a misstep. So I'm hoping that this is kind of them getting back on track with something that makes a little more sense.
Yeah, their UI has always been atrocious, though.
It's true.
Yeah.
I've never used an LG phone that wasn't a Nexus device other than the G5, but the G5's UI was like, it was a dumpster. You had to enable having an app tray on it.
Yeah.
Because I remember I did my review, put it out, said that it didn't have an app tray, and then a day later they released an update saying that it did have one, and the commenters were like, "Oh my god, did you even use this phone?"
Yeah.
But yeah, that was like a totally weird move, because it doesn't make sense in terms of Android, because people expect that feature on an Android device.
Their UI is like, it's, if you look at their campaign for the G5, and it has like really play and fun and colors and joy. That's like their UI. It's like, let's just throw Happy Town on my
Colors
phone
and joy.
Yeah.
Bubbly icons and everything, and it's just.
I think we will see like a more stripped back UI with the G6. So like there's a pretty big backlash to that, and I think a lot of OEMs are moving in that direction. Samsung with, what is it, like TouchWiz 3 now with the S.
I think we're far past 3, but yeah.
I think it might actually be 3.
Yeah.
Anyways, whatever the latest version of TouchWiz is, it wasn't as intrusive as the one prior to that. And I think a lot of OEMs are moving in that direction. They're sort of realizing that Android's fine on its own. It's cool. Like, people are happy with something that's close to stock Android with maybe like a few extra features thrown on top.
So we're kind of running short on time. So I hope y'all brought your
I
shoutouts.
did.
Oh, we did.
I have the best one.
I think Zach is still thinking of his. So
Always.
Pat, start us off.
I'd like to send my shout out to McDonald's
Okay.
for doing all day breakfast, because Egg McMuffins are the bomb. And sometimes after work, I'll go to the McDonald's at Union Station and get 2 Egg McMuffins.
Ugh.
And now I don't have to go to that particular McDonald's.
Because all of them are going to do it.
All of them. I think, is it all of them? No, it's select locations. But there's
So that's the same as it was before.
but there's more locations, and there's one right near my house, which is great. That's all
Okay.
that matters. That's all I care about. Egg McMuffins are good.
Gross.
Jess?
I think I'll stick with my shouting out big national company trend. Airbnb is profitable for the first time in history for the last quarter of 2016. So I'd like to give my shout out to them. Congrats, guys, disrupting the hotel industry.
Never used them. I don't know if any of you guys have. I
It's
hear too many
fantastic.
scary reports about like some certain adult content videos being filmed in Airbnb and stuff in Vegas, and it's not. No,
I imagine it would lend itself well to that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. New shoot location every week.
Like, clean it up, guys. Clean it up.
Keep things original.
Zach?
Yeah. My shout out's gonna be to
Colors and joy.
yeah, really. No, we ordered. I ordered for the enjoyment of The Office a plethora of cereal choices. I don't know if that's an oxy or those words.
Which I had
No.
for dinner last
They
night,
were, yeah.
mind you.
So yeah, and the best one of them all is Reese's Pieces Puffs.
Cinnamon
So my
Toast
shout out-
Crunch.
No,
Is there French Toast Crunch too?
there is French Toast.
I'm gonna have
Crunch.
that right after the podcast.
Exciting
We're missing
stuff.
Apple Jacks, but I think that's an American thing. I can't
No.
remember. But anyways, Reese's Pieces Puff. That's my shout out.
You can buy Apple Jacks here.
Can you? Okay. Maybe you can't buy it in America. You can't buy ketchup chips there. That's a fact.
Yeah. Speaking of America, my shout out goes out to all the scientists who have gone rogue and started tweeting actual facts on Twitter after getting a gag order from the Trump administration.
No.
Props to you defending science.
What's his word? What's Trump's word? Adjusted or
Adjusted
facts.
Alternative facts.
alternative facts.
So we hope, I hope we didn't present any alternative facts today,
Just facts.
but you never know with us. So sorry, guys. On that note, thanks so much for listening and watching. Zach is going to give us all the like buttons you need to smash.
Yeah, for sure. So if you were watching us on Facebook and you haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button and thumbs up, because I'm sure this was an awesome podcast. but it actually helps rank us higher, which makes us make more content, and everything's great. If you're on Twitter, it's at Mobile Syrup. If you're on Instagram, it's also at Mobile Syrup. If you're on Snapchat, it's also at Mobile Syrup. Facebook, it's at Mobile Syrup. Just really pick your social media location of choice and search Mobile Syrup.
Are we on Ello?
We keep it simple.
Can brands be on Ello? I don't know.
Do we have a Google Plus?
We do have a Google Plus. Or
For
G+.
those of you, for the
Those of
4
you
of you
on
on
Google
Google Plus.
Those of you on Google Plus,
Keep the comments coming.
All 10 of you?
Keep it coming.
Yeah.
You know,
You could also
the
leave
cat
us.
we
goes down
appreciate
with the
it.
ship.
Could also leave us a review on iTunes.
Yeah, that's a
That's
big thing,
true.
right? So we want to know your feedback on what we're creating and what we're doing so we can make better content for you. So importantly, give us a star rating. But if you want to go and give us a written rating, then that's much appreciated.
And what's everyone's personal Twitter handle?
You can find me at Jessica Vomiero.
You can find me at Patrick_O'Rourke. I can't spell my last name either.
Mine's at Zach Gilbert. Simple.
Mine's at Igor Bonifacic. Good luck figuring out how to spell my last
yours
name.
is even harder.
Yeah.
Just go to mobilesyrup.com and just find something you wrote.
That's true.
Exactly.
There you go.
Mobile Syrop's first follower, Igor Bonifacic.
Woo.
So thank you so much for listening and watching, as I said, and we'll see you on next week.
See it.